Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with everyone. And it's a real pleasure and delight to be talking about such a light topic as the one we have today. So just as a way of kickstarting the discussion, I'd like to do a very quick straw poll. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all concerned, and 10 being very, very, very almost cataclysmically concerned, I'd like to do a survey of how concerned you all are concerning the effects of the rise of nascent technologies like artificial intelligence on the world order and also the economy at large. So if you could raise your hands, if you're sort of not particularly concerned, in the ballpark of 1 to 3, please raise your hands. Optimism is a virtue. That's great. Let's go for 4 to 6 then. Who's in the sort of 4 to 6 ballpark? Okay, not bad. And now let's do 7 to 10. 7 to 10. Wonderful. So this is a tough crowd to sell technology to, but a much easier crowd to sell sort of, I suppose, remedies and calming remedies to. I'm not going to specify what kinds. So on that very note, it gives me great pleasure as a philosopher looking at the intersection of geopolitics, technology, and also the ethics of governance and how we ought to think about the relationship between labor and technology, between the private and the public sectors in relation to transnational and existential challenges. It gives me great pleasure to be moderating this particular panel. And of course, I'd like us to once again welcome the brilliant panelists. We have Dr. Kerr, Managing Director for Greater China, Asia Director for Growth at Mott, MacDonald, Iñaki Amate, who is a chairman at the European Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, Kenny Lam, a CEO at 2 Sigma Asia Pacific, and of course, Nisa Leung, Managing Partner at Qiming Venture Partners. These are your speakers and they're most welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So I'd like to start with you, Anne, and the question I have for you is actually just, can you help us picture and situate this discussion a tad more in the Hong Kong context? As business leaders, as corporate heads here in Hong Kong, why should we care about the rise of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and maybe blockchain and also other forms of digital technologies as well? What exactly are the stakes involved from your point of view? And could you perhaps, share with us a tad more about your own first personal experiences navigating the rapid changes unseen in more than a century? What do you reckon?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Brian. I don't think I could possibly talk personally for more than a century because I'm like Dee. I'm the younger member of this panel. It has to be said.
Agreed.
So thank you. So now we've got that straight. Let's go straight to talk about AI. And I think when we were in discussions about this panel and what the context of the panel was, we talked about, are there any boundaries to innovation? And are there any blockers? Are there any hindrances? And I think that's a really important topic to discuss. And also looking at where is Hong Kong's position, because this is all about what is Hong Kong's role. So what I see is that we have a lot of AI evolving. We have got a lot of emerging technologies evolving. We've got more personalized and efficient services. We've got hospital care. We've got healthcare. We've got education. We talked about education and the importance of education. We've got all of these options that are really embracing technology, innovation, AI and other aspects. And, this is not new though. And in my career, this has not been a new thing because about 15 years ago, if I may just divert a little bit, I was working on a project where we were looking at connectivity between homes and living and mobility. So you had a home, you had a vehicle, and you powered the vehicle from the generation of energy from your home and vice versa. You had a little chatbot as well, which was a home help, which was quite wonderful because the chatbot, you could instruct it from anywhere in the world to run your bath at a certain temperature. You also had it cleaning your bath and so on and so forth. So technologies are not new. These are not new technologies. But I think one of the things that we see is that while we've got all these advances, we've got some benefits, but we've also got some potential disbenefits. So what about the scaling up? Can we actually make the innovations scalable across the world uniformly? And of course we can't. So there's a scaling up issue. There's social dysfunction issue as well. If we only apply our minds to innovation and AI. But fundamentally, the thing that I'm really, really interested in and really challenged by is energy and the energy demands. Because I think that energy is the area that many people don't really think about. Not to say the concerns about when two bots chat to each other and exclude the humans. But I think that energy demand is the really challenging aspect. When we think also, I was referred to by Ian about the oil and the black stuff, we are continuing globally to increase our consumption of oil. This has not changed. It's slowed down a bit since COVID times, but it's not actually changed. We still keep going. And also our electricity consumption is 3 times what it was 40 years ago. And when we think about water, a bottle of water, one of these cans on the table, that takes 2,000 times more energy to produce than the same quantity of water run from a tap. So we are consuming and consuming and consuming. So I think that our challenge is energy going to limit our growth? Many people will say we have new opportunities, we have new ideas for energy and solutions for energy, but I think it's a complex issue, and water and energy are really, really tied. Can I make one more comment as well about the ChatGPT, which everybody adores, loves, and uses rapidly? Emails that we send to copy to 100 people with 100 words. 100 words generated by ChatGPT. Now, Iñaki, you might challenge me on this, but I find that 100 words created by ChatGPT uses the same amount of energy as it takes to make one of these cans of water. That's quite a lot. And water keeps, bottled water, canned water, the consumption keeps rising. So where are we going in terms of our energy? So I think that's the biggest challenge in my view.
Thank you. I had a very heated debate, pun intended, with a number of industry experts in a closed-door dialogue last week concerning whether or not the rise of increasingly larger and larger language models would require and behove, our turning to nuclear energy and other forms of, extremely efficient but also potentially perilous renewable energy as a way of fueling and also sustaining our drive towards potential AGI and even superintelligence in the future. And that was a great and riveting discussion. But on that note of sustaining the energy consumption practices and also more generally data management and ownership in relation to large language models, I'd like to bring in Iñaki, because you wear 2 hats, right? You've got your wonderful role at EY, great institution, but you've also got another role at the European Chamber, at the European Chamber of Commerce, where you are, of course, the leader of the chamber, so to speak. Could you tell us a bit more about how Europe, European businesses, European financial leaders, how are they viewing AI and the opportunities and challenges associated with it, especially in light of the comments from Anne on the energy consumption dimension, so to speak?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Brian. So yes, I think this in Europe, AI, well, everywhere, but in Europe particularly, is becoming very evident that it's no longer a question of where is going to be the disruption, how is going to anyone be affected or impacted. I was last weekend in the largest investor and startups conference globally in Helsinki, and AI is everywhere. So every AI is going to impact every single thing, every single dimension, every single sector and industry. Right now, the challenge that we are facing is that when we look at the numbers of adoption of AI in organizations, it's still very low. So only 10% of the employees have been actually adopting artificial intelligence. But the expectation is that by 2033, we should reach something over 70% of that adoption. We also see that this is starting to impact in about 5% of all the automation of processes in organizations, and that's something that we also anticipate is going to be a lot more in the next years to come. In terms of impact, we see that, it's going to probably mean, in Europe particularly, a growth of between 0.8 to 1.9% of GDP by 2033. But globally, it's going to be around 1.4. So it means that, there will be regions like Africa that probably will not see a massive growth, but other regions like Europe that we expect that is going to have a significant impact. Also in productivity. Not so much in inflation, because we think that is not necessarily correlated, but definitely in everything else. So when you look at these numbers, I mean, what we see right now is that definitely there is a barrier to the adoption that is coming primarily because a fear from employees to adopt a technology that they feel is going to impact the way of working, their livelihood, and therefore is going to need to be overcome. And that is something that we have seen in the past. We have seen with new technologies emerging. We saw that in the late 90s where the internet started to spread. We've seen that afterwards with the digital transformation that most of the organizations had to undergo in the last 2 decades. And obviously now we are going to see that coming over the next 7 to 10 years. Now, how organizations are going to embrace that is the key question, right? And I think is where you really need to start looking into starting from the top, how the board is actually set in order to be prepared for pivot and take additional risks that are coming with new emerging technologies. And not most of the boards, if you think about that, the role of the advisor on the board is typically to prevent from risks coming into the organization. Is looking into how you're going to make sure that, the business is going to continue in the best possible way. And when a new challenging trend, like a new emerging technology like this is coming, it's difficult for the board to really be prepared for that potential risk that is coming associated with it. And that you push that down the organization and you realize that actually the culture needs to also adapt, needs to also evolve, and be prepared for embracing change in a way that has never been done before. And this is just when we talk about AI. But when you look, and we can talk about it later if you want, but when you look into the current situation globally, when you have a very complex geopolitical situation that is emerging, you will realize that this is impacting so many other dimensions that organizations need to really think about. And they will need to start preparing for things like cybersecurity, which is something that is going to become even more acute in the future. But then you start looking at, I was looking at the new sector that we are looking at right now, which is space and space tech. And when you look at space, the world is obviously fragmented, but the space is becoming fragmented as well. And the fact that, the places like Hong Kong have a potential role to play when you have an opportunity to drive funding from different parts of the world to really invest into an emerging space, like it's the space. But then looking at the fact that, European organizations that are at the moment very cutting edge in this domain, they are probably thinking how they are going to be able to get access to funding in this part of the world is becoming very, very challenging.
You talked a lot about businesses evolving, adapting, adjusting. And here I want to bring in Kenny, because obviously in the case of 2 Sigma, where you play a very prominent and important role, AI isn't something that's new to you guys. You've long worked with AI, you've danced with AI, you've harnessed AI, and it really has been ubiquitous in your sort of practice and the line of work you do. Could you perhaps comment on what you make of that symbiotic relationship between 2 Sigma and quantitative finance at large and AI? And more specifically, how have the past 5 years of changes with regards to large language models, generative AI, even discriminative AI, how has that altered or enhanced the work you do at 2 Sigma? Kenny.
Brian, thanks so much for managing this panel, and also thank you, Hong Kong GCC, for inviting. I do want to give a bit of context of who we are first, right? 2 Sigma is one of the largest quantitative hedge funds. If you think about hedge funds, your immediate view is you have a PM and you have a lot of analysts. We have 2,000 employees within which 1,200 are actually engineers and data scientists. Within the 1,200 data scientists and engineers, about 250 are PhDs. I keep saying that I'm probably one of the least educated guy in the company. With that context, we see investing as a scientific process. And what does that mean? It means we're trying to use the largest amount of data, the most advanced technologies to apply to that data, create algorithms to find alpha. And so it's quite a unique process that's different from other types of investment firms. Now, with that context, if you bring it to Asia, it really signifies a lot of upside for us. If you think about Asia, you have one of the largest capital markets, Japan and China. You have a lot of unstructured data, meaning that the data are not processed, but you could do a lot with it, you could find value with it. And third is you have amazing amount of talent, not only from China, you have it in Hong Kong, in Japan, everywhere. And so we see this as huge upside. But at the same time, we have to deal with evolving regulation on how we deploy technologies and how we use data. We are a US-centric firm that is expanding rapidly in Asia. And as you rightly mentioned, there's a lot of geopolitical and other types of issues we have to make sure we deal with in a very careful way in order for us to thrive. And that's why we not only see this as an upside, but as a way, as with any investment firm, a risk management opportunity. Lastly, related to AI, we're quite surprised, to be honest, by the hype and the uproar of the focus on the word AI. It's a bit of a generic term. There are a lot of sub-tools within the AI that we've deployed for a long time. If you look at natural language processing, we've started using it really about 10 years ago. Not to say that this is not an important step of the evolution, but we don't think is a revolution that would be such a disruption to our day-to-day business. But we do think that we need to continue to evolve. In the last 4 or 5 years, I think that there are probably two main changes. Given the focus on AI and the investment in AI, we are finding it highly competitive to recruit talent. We have a lot more firms competing for talent in AI. Second is the resources in terms of compute has become more constrained, and therefore we need to put a lot more effort in our R&D to ensure that we build the best platform going forward. But we have to say we started this process about 5 years ago. We believe that investing should be scientific. We should try as much as we can to take emotion out of it, and therefore using data, advanced technologies has always been the process, and we're very excited to be in Asia. Last point, Hong Kong is an important place for us. We started in Hong Kong about 13 years ago. It is still our biggest research base out of Asia. And we look at Japan, we look at Shanghai. They're great markets, but Hong Kong still is one of the bases that attracts the best talent. So we're excited to be in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Kenny. And speaking of wonderful homegrown talents, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Nisa, on this very front, you're one of the most exemplary investors, homegrown investors into nascent and emerging technologies in VC and beyond. Your name is very well known. And indeed, on that front, I'd like to sort of pick your brains on a particular question concerning AI's usages in biotechnology and also health science at large, especially given the recent Nobel Prize results, right? And a particular example, of course, is protein folding and the usage of machine learning to conduct, or to compress significantly the time and also the resources required for us to have, these remarkable scientific and pharmaceutical breakthroughs. Can you perhaps share with us in the room, what you've observed as trends in biotech, health tech, and other forms of technology thanks to breakthroughs in AI, or maybe not breakthroughs, but just intensifying investment and also more mature deployment practices?
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here. Thanks, Agnes, for the invite. Actually, recently I caught up with my AI professor at Cornell. I took AI 30 years ago, and he's now the dean of MIT School of Computing, and he also came out with a book with Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt 2 years ago called The Age of AI. Highly recommend. They're coming out with the second version, soon. So we talk about. I told him, hey, AI is finally cool after 30 years. And then we also talked about, the type of research MIT is doing compared to the type of, companies that I've invested in AI health. And in fact, there's a complete overlap. And so it's really interesting that, I've always really believed in using AI for healthcare. And we're probably the largest AI healthcare investor in Asia. And I think you talked about DeepMind getting Nobel Prize, the $1 billion raise for Sierra, which is the biggest amount raised forever for a biotech company, Series A, and the new CEO, the founding CEO of the company is actually MTL, who used to be the president of Stanford University. So we've been very early investor in AI drug discovery, which is one of the killer apps for AI health. Starting from Schrödinger, which is a New York-based company, and it's a 30-year-old company which a lot of my partners say, why are you investing in a 30-year-old company? I mean, the fact that they've been around for 30 years means that they can't go public. But it's invested by two very smart angels for 30 years, Bill Gates and D.E. Shaw. And so when I looked at the company when they were first opened to an investment round, I felt that this makes a lot of sense. CADD, how to use AI to, for the physical science and the molecular structure of the drug. And the whole idea is, this can perhaps provide a tool for a lot of the scientists in, China or Asia, because we're really good at clinical development, but we're not very good at drug discovery. So can we have more tools for the scientists? So that's one thing. And also we invest in Recursion, which is a Salt Lake company, which helps use AI to sort of look at some of the failed drugs to repurpose them, whether or not we can use them for other therapeutics. So that company also has done quite well and went public. And the third company we decide to invest in is, okay, so Greater China, they're really strong in clinical development. Can we actually invest in a company in this region and be able to leverage on the cheaper clinical development cost? And so we invested in one of the least known healthcare biotech company based in Hong Kong called In Silico Medicine. So In Silico Medicine, when we invested, it was very, very early on, based out of Science Park. They have since expanded to about 7 countries worldwide, including 70 people in Abu Dhabi. And then a big team in Suzhou and Zhangjiang and US and so forth. But they became the first company in the world to use AI to identify the target, use AI to develop the molecular structure. And these drugs are now in phase 2A clinical in US and China. And actually some the recent data coming out for lung fibrosis looks amazing, first in class global. So, and they have about 30 drugs in the pipeline and just churning out, every month, new drugs. So there's no, the AI doesn't need to sleep, so it just keeps going. So I think, they've also had multiple MNCs pay them, like Sanofi paid them $1.2 billion US for 6 of their AI-derived drugs for global development and so forth. So I think it's actually very, very interesting. But I tell the CEO, I said, look, we don't need to be successful in the first drug. We don't need to be successful in the second drug. But if we can be successful somewhere along the third or the fourth or the fifth, that means that we can potentially cut 10 years for drug discovery or more. That means we can cut tens of millions of dollars upfront for any new drug that we're trying to discover. That means that maybe we could also increase the accuracy, the success rate of developing drugs. And perhaps we can develop drugs that could be cheaper and more affordable for the world. So I think that's something that we're trying to get at. They also became the first company to publish a Nature article from end to end, how they develop a drug using AI, how they develop the AI platform. And now they started off with GAN. So we actually became the first investor in a generative AI drug discovery company in the world back in 2016. And then, and how they develop a drug and get into clinical and so forth. So, now we have gone beyond, such as, we've recently invested in a Harvard spinoff, which has been around for 8-9 years, to replace potentially animal trials. Because if we're generating so much AI drugs, we can't wait. The bottleneck is the animal studies. And I think a lot of the Western countries are saying, can we find other alternatives rather than using the monkeys and the mice, for animal studies? So this is something, it's called organized, sort of an organ on a chip. Each chip represents cardiovascular or liver will be for the toxicity and so on and so forth. So it's very fast, very cheap. It could be a replacement, and US FDA just announced that this could be a good alternative. So I think, that's one application. We've also have lots of applications, including AI pathology, which I think is very exciting as well.
Thank you, Nisa. And as a very quick follow-up, you've talked a lot about AI in the companies that you invest in, but I want to turn now to the question of using AI in the investment process itself. To what extent do you see as with, in the case of hedge funds, for instance, it's clear that they already have AI integrated and embedded in the very process of the work they do. But when it comes to venture capital, do you see AI models as helpful in helping you spot the sort of future unicorns and spot future talents? Or is it ultimately, a field where the human touch, the Midas touch, really matters more than the AI touch, so to speak?
Yeah, because I think 70% of our first investment in the company is angel round, Series A round, when there's like 1, 2, 3 people. So it's really hard using AI to spot the people. I think later stage, yes. When companies have more clinical data, yes. But I think we spend so much time as a venture investor grooming these companies. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I add a point? That's a great question, because if you look at the investment process, I started by saying it's a scientific process. I did not highlight the fact that we're now mostly in the public markets, because I think, Nisa, to your point, the reason why we're in the public markets is you have the largest amount of data. And if you go through a process of using quant finance, the only proper market right now is still the public markets, because you have the largest amount of data, the largest amount of technology that could be deployed to the market and react immediately to you. Right? And so in private investing, particularly in early stage, is still quite tough. We do have a private arm, but the focus is actually on real estate, not on early stage investing, because we believe the next asset class that could be disrupted is real estate. The largest asset class, you get a lot of data. It can actually be disrupted in some ways by data technology in that investing in real estate.
Thank you, Kenny. Now, I think I've done enough work in hopefully outlining to you why we should be optimistic about the rise of AI and its utility. So I'm going to return to the original stance that we started off with, which is the problems and also the risk associated with AI in an increasingly complex world. And my question is for Iñaki, actually, on the geopolitics of AI. It's evident that increasingly we're living in a world where Sino-American competition, rivalry between regional powers and different regional power centers are leading to some extent a fracturing, of the global data order, as well as an increasing balkanization of AI, of digital developments, of all sorts of advanced technologies. So the question I'm sure many in the room would have for the panel, but specifically for you too, is where do you see the future of Hong Kong amidst this Sino-American tech decoupling and sort of the AI rivalry, not just in the semiconductor space or the LM space, but also the data space, right? How can we leverage 1C2S, as a city to preserve our connectedness, if at all possible, with the Western data circuits, whilst concurrently integrating further into our country's great developments in technology and beyond? What do you reckon, Iñaki?
Well, I think it was
question.
The founder of NVIDIA was here last week, and he was basically talking about the importance of the role that Hong Kong still has to play, and more can play by actually taking more ownership and more relevance in actually connecting different parts of the world. I mean, the reality is that number one, I think everyone is looking at the regulatory part of how AI and data in general is going to be taken into consideration in different parts of the world, different jurisdictions. The EU probably was the first one coming forward with a pretty good and solid framework that now everyone is trying to follow. And I think Hong Kong, in a way, can play a very interesting role for those organizations, especially from China, that are trying to provide services to European markets by helping to understand a lot better, how to operate in that framework. So there are a number of organizations that operate here in Hong Kong that offer that kind of service, that offer the possibility to advise on what is the best way to enter with your digital services those markets. Secondly, I think that we will have also an environment where more and more we will have organizations from different parts of the world that are going to start thinking a little bit more hardly, where they want to operate. Again, when I was in Europe recently, interviewing different founders of different companies, and when we look always at the classical question, okay, so you have a fantastic product, you have a fantastic service, how do you plan to scale? How do you going to grow? And obviously, the question I always bring, or the opportunity that I always talk about, is about Asia. And Asia through Hong Kong. So I said, okay, you might be a very successful German advanced manufacturing organization with a very small team and operating in Europe, but if you want to scale, you need really to think about how you're going to come to this part of the world. And depending on the type of technology that they have developed, if it's the kind of technology that starts to be qualified as a strategic by many countries, it creates a difficult question to answer. So some of these organizations might say, look, if my technology is strategic, I mentioned before, for example, space tech, they will say, well, look, we have decided that we want to prioritize operating in those markets that align with our values. And that's a very interesting question when you start going in that direction, because they would say, we come from one of the oldest democracies in the world. So we want to keep operating with countries and markets that align with that kind of philosophy. So then the question is, okay, how do you want to expand globally? And how you're going to do that? And I think that opens a very interesting question for the fact that there will be more and more opportunities, because there will be industries that they will need to almost segregate by region in order to be operate with the key players in that region. So all of a sudden, you are going to have emerging industries around AI in places like, obviously, Europe, that the organizations that are working in Europe probably are going to rethink whether they want to operate in some markets in Asia, and that will open the opportunity for organizations in Asia that want to basically start operating in those markets.
Segmentation, adaptation, localization, building up a degree of resilience against pressures to decouple. These are all very important tips and recommendations. Now, I want to turn over to you and ask you about your thoughts on the following. Just late October this year, the Hong Kong SAR government released a policy document outlining its thoughts and guidelines for the financial usages and applications of AI, ensuring that there's responsible usage of AI, so to speak, in this domain. I was wondering, what do you make of the Hong Kong government's policy at large towards AI regulation? Is the government doing enough? Could there be more that could be done? What are the areas of relative deficiencies and the areas of relative strengths that you've identified given your close-up interactions and also discussions with many of the top policymakers and legislators in the SAR? What do you reckon?
A fabulous question. Could take a long time to answer, but I think in short...
We've got time, no problem.
Excellent, very good. We have lunch as well. I would say one of the very important things, though, was tying back to the comments in the previous panel, talking about language. So Hong Kong is the most international of the Chinese cities. Hong Kong is the most Chinese of the international and global cities. The language aspect, the fact that everybody is either bi or trilingual here, and the fact that we're talking about schooling, education, etc., moving into making sure that people are quintilingual, etc., using other languages, I think that there's a lot going forward. I think also, yes, a government has pushed forward, but there's a lot more we can do, because we can tie a lot more aspects into these regulations. It's not just, that's what I was trying to say at the beginning, it was not just about AI per se. There are the many other aspects that need to be thought about in terms of what does AI actually mean, what does it mean in terms of regulation, etc. Because then you've got the issues around the energy, the water, etc. But the language aspects are the really, really important aspects. The education, the training, and making sure that people, you look at the small children and they are not scared at all by technology. 2-3-year-olds can navigate. If you want something done, you just ask a 3-year-old. They'll sort it for you. And I think that's possibly why we have a new arrangement in design offices and so forth. We should have 3-year-olds in the design offices. But actually, seriously, we shouldn't be scared. We should be using and getting all of the applications that we possibly can into people's brains from the earliest age. So there's an education aspect as well that should not be ignored. I think the regulatory aspect is a really important one, because I think someone talked about governance and the regulation in terms of this, the boards, and how boards are actually developing their skills as well. And that's really interesting to see how boards react and adapt to new ideas, because usually on boards you'll find people who are chief financial officers, chief, etc., etc. But do you have chief technology officers, etc., who are properly skilled. And availability is not a skill in our parlance.
I just want to supplement that actually, which is that we can easily get AI in the future to write code, parts of code at least, in a majority of contexts. And that's why when we hear people say we need to have coding education made mandatory, that might have been the case 10 years ago, but these days the questions are being asked, do we actually need to make coding education mandatory or not? Maybe we just need to teach them to write better prompts, students, so to speak. But an aspect that's often neglected, and that's also why, at HKU, for instance, we're pioneering in a master's in AI ethics and society course, is the question of governing and regulating and managing AI, and to think about how we can leverage technologies for the good of humanity, to preserve what John Tassiolis, a philosopher in Oxford, terms the right to a human decision and a right to an open future that is not defined by or overridden by machines and AI, so to speak. So on that note, I want to open up the floor to questions because we want to be open about this space. And I'd love to entertain questions from the floor. If you could keep your question concise and introduce yourselves, that'd be lovely. And I look forward to, inviting folks on the floor. I see two questions. So Paul and a gentleman on that table in that order. Can we get a microphone to these two lovely gentlemen, please? In that order. One here and one over there. Alfonso. Lo siento, Alfonso. Gracias. Sí.
Thank you. Paul McComb, British Chamber of Commerce. Excellent chat. A lot of the audience, I think, were in that sort of, were worried about AI. My question to the panel is, if you think of genetically modified foods and then the growth in organic farming, or things that are machine produced versus handmade cars and all this sort of stuff, isn't there a resurgence for handmade, made by humans? And doesn't AI take the grunt away? And our future is in that creative space and making and from the hand. As a thought.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Alfonso, can we get a mic to Senor Alfonso? Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Alfonso Ballesteros. I bring European tech to Asian markets, leveraging Hong Kong. I'm also chairman of the Europe Committee at HKGCC. And my question is, where do you see AI coming into Hong Kong as an economy? Where do you see the low-hanging fruit? Where do you see change happening first? Both in terms of industries and whether it's going to be top-down or bottom-up. Is it going to be executives deciding that the company is going to implement these policies, or is it people just taking it into their own hands and eventually the company having to adapt to the fact that everyone's using it on the side and they might as well make a system out of it? So basically, how do you see AI coming into Hong Kong? And from that angle, is there anything that could be done to reduce risk, to improve it, either from a regulation point of view, from an infrastructure point of view? In other words, how can AI, in a way, soft land in Hong Kong in the best way possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take a stab at Paul's question?
I'd like to respond to Paul and say I think there is definitely a resurgence of handmade and homemade. Everybody's looking for something different as well. And I would also have a plea for, we cannot forget about the fundamentals, because what happens when the metaphorical lights get turned off and we don't know how to design a building, we don't know how to treat water, we don't know how to connect from place to place. I think that's really, really important. So yes, embrace, bring it in, make sure that you actually do get the regulation in place and embrace, because it's not going to come in. It's already here. It's here in so many different ways, and informal and so forth. So let's not forget about first principles, please.
Great, wonderful. And Alfonso's question?
I'll take the, and I wouldn't even think of it as a risk that we're trying to manage. I do think Hong Kong has such a special place. So I'll give one fact. As I mentioned, we recruit a lot of PhDs, and many of them were actually from Tsinghua, Beida, that would take a PhD from MIT or Cornell, we recruit and have them work in the US. That's the early trend. What we see now is a lot of these great Tsinghua, Beida now gravitating towards actually taking PhD degrees in Hong Kong. And so they're looking at Hong Kong UST, Hong Kong U, and we now need to rethink our recruitment strategy globally to think about where we can really attract the best talent. Honestly, before it was mostly US-centric. Now we're seeing the best minds may actually be in the US and also be in Hong Kong and Singapore. And so we have a lot that we could do in Hong Kong on double downing on the educational system and build this to be a base of talent that would drive the AI development. I think Jensen Huang was not trying to be just flattering Hong Kong UST. They are, and they could be, the MIT of Hong Kong or China. And so we are seeing a lot of talent that would gravitate towards having degrees now in Hong Kong.
The shifts in geopolitics certainly mean that I think we have a golden opportunity for Hong Kong to position itself to be the Oxbridge of the East, to be the MIT and Harvard of China. And we're very much in that position to do so if we can seize the opportunity and carpe diem. Any other last questions from the floor before we return to the panel? Please do chip in. We'd love to hear from you. The more the merrier. No? Okay. All right, no hands? Fantastic, that's very handy. Okay, well, I'd like to... Yes, I had to make that joke just to liven up the atmosphere a bit. I'd like to close off this panel, this wonderful, riveting discussion, with the final closing remarks from each of you on the following question. That many of you have great access to the Hong Kong government, to the mainland government, and to other governments around the world. If there's one piece of advice you'd like governments to think carefully about when it comes to AI regulation and governance at large, coming from the point of view of a business and finance professional, what would that one piece of advice be? Sort of the MVA, so to speak, most valuable advice in that sense. I'm going to start from right to left. So I'm going to begin with Iñaki and finish with Nisa in that order. So starting with you.
No, thanks.
Iñaki.
So at the European Chamber, we actually have a council focused entirely on the digital emerging technologies, and AI is definitely one of the key pillars. And we actually went through this question with our members recently. And understanding, like I said before, that the European Union has actually put forward a very solid framework. We were looking at the impact that it has for innovation and the acceleration of creation of opportunities for companies. And the analysis is that actually, in this particular case, specifically for Hong Kong, the advice would be probably don't over-regulate. If you over-regulate, you might actually kill the opportunities that emerge at the very early stage when organizations and startups are basically trying to come up with new ideas and new concepts and services. That would be my
Thank
suggestion.
You. Don't over-regulate. Wonderful. Anne?
So my most valuable advice would be think about diversity of thought, think about diversity of opinion, think about diversity of age, and bring in people into the panels, the discussions, the committees, the commissions who are of varying ages and from varying backgrounds and also from varying perspectives from professions, etc., so that it's really bringing a melting pot rather than just being one particular sector of the community that is thought about, because it often is one particular sector of the community that gets the most attention, and it should be a wider range. So diversity, please.
Diversity and diversification.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for bringing me in here. So, just kidding. Apologies, Kenny. No, Anne and I together. The both of us. Yes, join forces. Kenny?
The one advice I would give is engage with the industry. I think actually Hong Kong is one of the most open and receptive to industry thoughts and consultation. I do think that we should continue that, especially in a field like AI, which is evolving on a day-to-day basis. Then engaging with the industry would actually be key. Would love to provide more inputs to help with growing this industry.
Engage the industry. And finally, to Nisa, you have the last word, or the penultimate word, actually.
Well, I think, we just co-hosted a big scientific, a scientist event 2 weeks ago in Hong Kong with about 350 scientists with Nobel laureates and from all over the world, as well as from China. So Hong Kong actually becomes a very good ground for these scientists to collaborate and discuss. And I think, given the fact that in answering to the question, I think there's so many really exciting, and Hong Kong people are so entrepreneurial. Right now, just now I was at, when we were waiting at the break, I think there's an entrepreneur who's already using AI for personalized gift. Is it Ponty? I think the Hong Kong entrepreneurs are great. So, we should continue to encourage young people to come up with new ideas. And I think through years, we've heard from a lot of government officials from all over the world saying that the great thing about Hong Kong is the Hong Kong people are so entrepreneurial and think global. And I think we should continue to encourage our young people to do so. Thanks.
Ever entrepreneurial Lion Rock spirit is precisely what defines our panel, but also drives many of you here in a room. And of course, it falls upon me as the moderator of this panel to sort of conclude this session by saying the following. 20 years ago, machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithmic injustice, all of these terms would not have been heard of in 90 to 95% of boardrooms of companies across the world. And yet 20 years on, we're now in an age where to not grapple with and to not address seriously the opportunities and challenges of AI would frankly be a dereliction of duty on the part of many of us here in this room and beyond. And it is for that very reason I'd like us all to give a massive round of applause to this incredible panel of experts, thinkers and thought leaders on such an important subject. And I look forward to learning from all of you going forward, especially during lunchtime and over food. So thank you all very much, and thank you for being here. And once again, a round of applause to the brilliant panel, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Big thank you to all speakers and Professor Wong for those thought-provoking insights and how the future